Those are the two Makoros that just because you started doing something, Shaloi Lishma, you still have to continue doing it Lishma. Okay, Gavaltik. Nadava Mishari Lishnuiba. The Torah calls it a Nadava, and it's not allowed to be Mishal on Nadava, as Rashi says, Vaksiv Zevach Shlomim Karbanim. Shetezvich L'Shem Shlomim. Zogt Gemara Lema Masnisen the Loik Reb Shimon. Our Mishnah that says that just like by Zvachim, Shaloi Lishmon passes, or either it passes it in Gansen, or it's Le'olu L'Bailam L'Shem Chayva, that would not be consistent with Reb Shimon. Because Reb Shimon says that this would be impossible to occur by a carbon mincha. The Tanya Reb Shimon Omer, Kol Menachos shenikmetzu shaloi l'shman. What if a mincha, the kmitza was done shaloi l'shman? So you made kmitza, the kohen made kmitza on the minchas machvas l'shem minchas marcheshes. Ksheris, it'll be kosher anyway. And not only that, the olu l'baylam l'shem chayva. So Reb Shimon's arguing on both halachas. Sai, it's olu l'baylam l'shem chayva if it was a minchas chatois, and Sai if it was a minchas nedava. I'm sorry, Sai there's a kosher mincha if it's a minchas chatois, and Sai if it's nedava, it's going to be olu l'baylam l'shem chayva. And what's the reason for Reb Shimon, which will come under discussion? Is she'ein ha-menachos doimos l'zvachim. Menachos are different than zvachim. As Rashi says, the bezvachim oidinin loyalu. Surely Reb Shimon agrees to the Mishnah in Zvachim that if you shechted a carbon shaloi l'shma, it's not oilo l'baylam l'shem chayv. So why is the kaimitz different? She'ha-kaimitz machvas l'shum marcheshes. If you're making a kmitza and you're making a kmitza on a minchas machvas, which is a like a matzah form, it's a thin matzah, l'shum marcheshes, and you're saying I'm making the kmitza l'shem a minchas marcheshes, which is a big soft cake type of mixture. Ma'aseh muchoichin aleha, that it's l'shum machvas. You're working on a minchas machvas, and you're saying marcheshes. We know that's not a valid kavanah shaloi l'shma, because it's obvious from what you're doing that you're working on a minchas machvas. Zokt Rashi, ma'aseh mechichen shu mechasev. If he says I'm doing it l'shem marcheshes, we know he's not saying the truth. The marcheshes amuka, a marcheshes is fried in a deep pan. Ma'aseh roicheshin, and it's like sizzles, rocking, and it's a soft consistency. But machvas tzofa, a machvas is a flatter pan. Ma'aseh kosher, and therefore it'll come out much harder. The Perakal Menachos, we're going to learn all about the Menachos, but Kol Menachos bois matzah. So come to chois, it's impossible to have a Machshova shaloi l'shma, because what do you mean I'm doing it l'shem machvas? Look at what I'm touching. This is. I'm sorry. What do you mean you're doing it l'shem marcheshes? It's obvious you're kmitza. You're being koymet something that was a machvas. Or chareva l'shem blula. Chareva is a dry mincha without oil, which is the minchas kanois. L'shem blula, l'shem a mincha that would have oil in it. Once again, ma'aseh mechichen alah. I mean, you can hold on to an apple and say this is an orange. That's a joke. It's not really a wrong kavanah. By Zvachim, it's legitimate that I might have had the wrong kavanah, because shchita achas l'chulam. It doesn't matter if it's a oila, or if it's a chatos, or if it's a shlomim, whatever it is, the shchita is the same. You can't tell when you're shechting a behema what it is. Uzrika achas l'chulam. And there's one zrika for all animals. It doesn't make a difference. The zrika itself won't be obvious what the carbon is that you're doing it for. So therefore, Reb Shimon disagrees with the whole concept of a mincha shaloi l'shma, because he holds that would be something that's impossible. Zokt Gemara, this is all wonderful. The Rabashi. Now, Rashi tells us that the Gemara in short order is going to bring a steer in Reb Shimon himself. And the Gemara is going to bring a bas that says Reb Shimon holds that kol hamenachos shenikmetzu shaloi l'shman are psulos. A steer in Reb Shimon. So according to Rav Ashi, when he wanted a emperor, the steer in Reb Shimon's, this is what he said. He said, "Kan b'koymetz machvas l'shum marcheshes." Where did Reb Shimon say you can't have a mincha shaloi l'shuma? That's if you're making the kmitza on the minchas machvas and you're saying it l'shum marcheshes. It's obvious that that's not a wrong kavanah. That's just a joke. But kan b'koymetz minchas machvas l'shum marcheshes. I'm sorry. The Amar kan b'koymetz machvas l'shum marcheshes. Kan. So let me be clear. Kan b'koymetz machavas l'shum marcheshes. When does he say that it's not a problem, which is our rice over here? That's if he just said, I'm being koymetz machvas l'shum marcheshes. He's not even talking about the carbon. He's talking about the pan. This pan is a marcheshes. This pan is not a machvas. Who cares what the pan is? It has no shaykhs to anything. But kan b'koymetz minchas machvas l'shum minchas. But if you have kavanah specifically to make it into a wrong mincha, there Rab Shimon would hold that it's going to be possible. What about the taina shemaisea mochichan aleha? Even if I said I'm being koymetz minchas machvas l'shum marcheshes, my mice improve. I know I'm not working on that. So that we'll have to get into the Gemara later, how the Gemara understands Rab Ashi's halacha. But Rab Ashi does say that if you're koymetz machvas l'shum marcheshes, it means you're not even making a kavanah about the mincha. You're making a kavanah about a keli. That stam has no shaykhs. So that's where Rab Shimon says it's going to be kosher. Where does Rab Shimon say it's going to be possible? By minchas machvas l'shum minchas marcheshes. Therefore, you could say that Rab Shimon agrees to our Mishnah, and Rab Shimon will learn that masnisen mincha l'shum minchai. So, according to Rab Ashi's understanding of the halafam for the stira in Rab Shimon's, we can say that our Mishnah is consistent with one of those Rab Shimon's. And again, we're going to shortly see this shaila. Now, there were three terutzim offered when the Gemara asked the stira in Rab Shimon. One was Rabashi, which we just learned what his pshat was. But Elala Rabba v'Rava my klamemer. Rabba and Rava didn't learn like Ravashi. So according to their pshat, how are you going to understand the Mishnah that Reb Shimon seems not to be consistent? Let's see Rashi. Hanichel Ravashi the Mataritz Lakabon. He was Mataritz later on. Kirabinan the Reb Shimon the Amar Beduchta Chariti. We asked the stira because we found Reb Shimon who says in another place, Adar Reb Shimon the Hacha on Reb Shimon over here who says that there is no psul of mincha shaloi l'shema. Mataritz lu Ravashi. Ravashi answered the stira. The ha the Amar Reb Shimon alu that Reb Shimon said it's a good mincha. Our Reb Shimon here that we just learned is b'oimareni kaimitz machvas l'shem marcheshes. The kibun de yitkar shema de mincha. He never mentioned anything about a mincha. He was talking about kalim. El shema de mana. We say diver ruach ba'almahu. He stam eret stam shtosim, but it has no impact on the kashrus of the mincha. The other Kamar Reb Shimon ba'alma. The loyalu, the other place where we asked from, where Reb Shimon says, just like our Mishnah, that there is a psul by a mincha shalom shema, going the itkar shema de mincha. So therefore, according to that chiluk, we can say ikal ukmi that masnisin Reb Shimon. Our Mishnah is like the other Reb Shimon that's speaking about when he was maskir a minchas machvas l'shem minchas marcheshes. The masnisin the itkar shema de mincha could the mafarish. Beautiful. El Rabba ula Rava the Meshani lebitami achrini kidem afarish lakamon Michael Meimar. Rabba and Rava explained the stira in Reb Shimon differently. That will not help to understand how Reb Shimon can be consistent with our Mishnah. So Michael Meimar. Maybe we could work with Rabba's teretz. What did Rabba answer over there? Kan b'shinu kodesh, kan b'shinu bailim. Where does Reb Shimon say you cannot have a apostle of minchav shaloi l'shema? That's b'shinu kodesh, because ma'asav moichichan aleh. But where does Reb Shimon say a shinui will passel? That would be by shinu bailim. But Zog to Gemara, you can't say that that's Pshat in our Mishnah. You can't say that, yes, Reb Shimon who holds that there is a psul of Shinui is by Shinu Bailim, and that's what our Mishnah is talking about, because our Mishnah is very specific in the case that it's referring to. And it's not referring to Shinu Bailim. Hamasnisha Shinu Kodesh. Tikatani, what is the case of our Mishnah? Ketar l'shmon v'shaloi l'shmon, l'shom minchas chayta, u'l'shom minchas nedava. So it's quite clear that our Mishnah is not speaking about Ashinu Bailim. Our Mishnah is speaking about Ashinu Kodesh, and there is no case of Shinu Kodesh where Rabbah understands in Reb Shimon that it would be possible. Or v'inami, kida kamashani Rava, if you want to suggest to use the chiluk of Rava, what did Rava say to for the steer in Reb Shimon? Kan b'koimates mincha l'shum mincha, kan b'koimates mincha l'shum zevach. If you're koimates a mincha l'shum mincha, there it's going to be kosher. And that's our Reb Shimon over here. But kan b'koimates mincha l'shum zevach, if you made a kmitza on the mincha and you had in mind l'shum zevach, that's where it's going to be possible. So right away, everyone's going to jump on me. If it's ma'asav mechiach, when you had kavanah for a marcheshes over a machvas, what are you thinking? I'm shechting a shlomim over here when you make your kmitza? So the Gemara will again explain how that fits in to Reb Shimon. But al kalpanim, our Mishnah, you can't learn it speaking mincha l'shum zavach, because once again, our Mishnah is very specific in what this shaloi l'shma was. Hamas nisin mincha l'shum minchi, the katani shaloi l'shman l'shman. And the example that the Mishnah gave us, l'shem minchas nedava, l'shem minchas chayte. So Rabbah and Rava will not have any way to make Reb Shimon that we just learned consistent with our Mishnah. Rab Ashi has a way to make Reb Shimon consistent with our Mishnah, but Rabbah and Rava don't. So Gemara, in fact, you're right. Elul Rabbah v'Rava mechaverta masnisin the like Reb Shimon. Our Mishnah is a different Tana, and it wouldn't be consistent with Reb Shimon. So now for the suga we've all been waiting for Rami to Reb Shimon, not Reb Shimon. Now we're going to get involved in this stira in Reb Shimon himself. The Tanya we learned. Reb Shimon Aimer, Kodesh Kodesh Amhi Kachatas V'Kalshim. The Torah says this in reference to the Mincha. The Mincha is Kodesh Kodesh Amhi Kachatas V'Kalshim. Now, it's a little bit difficult to understand. How could you compare a mincha both to a chatas and an asham when they have different halachas? A chatas shaloi lishma is going to be possible. A mincha, an asham shaloi lishma is going to be kosher. So how could you compare this mincha? Is it doime to a chatas or is it doime to an asham? Yesh ben kechatas, the yesh ben kasham. Certain menachos have a din of a chatas and are partial shaloi lishma. The yesh men and certain menachos have a din of an asham and are kosher shloishma. Minchas chayte, the mincha b'chayte, that will treat like a chatos. Harei kechatos. Lefichach comes to shaloi l'shema will be psula kechatos. But a minchas nedava that harei ka'asham. Lefichach comes to shaloi l'shema kshera ucha asham. Ma asham kosher ucha asham. It's kosher like an asham, but an asham too that you shech shaloi l'shema. Ma asham kosher ve'ena maratza. But it's not maratza for the bailim, and the bailim will need to bring a new carbon. Af minchas nedava kshera ve'ena maratza. Beautiful. So that is the kasha, because here Reb Shimon says quite clearly that a mincha shaloi l'shema is no different than a carbon shaloi l'shema. If it's a chatos, it's going to be possible, and if it's a nedava, then it's going to be kosher, but for the other labaylim l'shem chayv. Amar Rabbah. Now we're going to go back to the terutzim that the Gemara alluded to earlier. Loy kash, it's not shver. Kan b'shinu kodesh. Where does Reb Shimon say you can't have a psul shaloi l'shma? That's by shinu kodesh. Kan b'shinu bailim. This last brisa that quotes Reb Shimon as saying that there is something of a psul shaloi l'shma, that will be by shinu bailim. Amar le Abaye, frekt Abaye, but that doesn't make sense. Why? Because michti Machshova the pasal rachmana hakeshu, the pasuk that we know that a shaloi lishma is pasal, we learn it from a hekesh. It's a hekesh from zvachim to menachos, and there's no reason to make that distinction. Mali shinu kodesh, mali shinu bailim. Why should there be a difference? if it's a limud from a pasuk, how could you make that distinction? Amalei, so Rabba told Abaye, of course I can make that distinction, because it's a logical distinction. The Kamar Rab Shimon Svarahi. Rab Shimon is saying a svara. Yes, of course there's a psul of Shaloi Lishma, but it's physically it's not going to occur. You cannot have a Shaloi Lishma when a kohen is dedicating a Machshova and a Machvas, or vice versa. That's not Shaloi Lishma. It's open that he's not saying the truth. So that's not a real Shaloi Lishma. When the Torah teaches us from Zvachim to Menachos that Shaloi Lishma is possible, that means if it's a legitimate Shaloi Lishma, not if it's not really a Shaloi Lishma. And the Rab Shimon Darish time of the Kra. We know Rab Shimon holds that you're Darish time of the Kra. So therefore, we could make that argument that the Torah never meant to create a psul Shaloi Lishma by a mincha where it's so obvious that he's being mechasef. The Rab Shimon Darish time of the Kra. So therefore, Machshova the loy minkara pasol rachmana. What type of Machshova Shaloi Lishma did the Torah pasol? A Machshova that you can't really tell if it's the right one or the wrong one. So maybe the wrong one is his true kavanah and it's a real kavanah of Shaloi Lishma. But Machshova the minkara, if it's so obvious that this is not a legitimate Machshova, loy pasol rachmana, the Torah wouldn't have pasol. That is how Rabbah remains with his teretz on Rab Shimon. But of course, that teretz wouldn't help for our Mishnah because our Mishnah is speaking in a Shaloi Lishma of Machvas L'Shom Cheshes, not a Shaloi Lishma of Shinu Bailim. Gewaltig. Let's see the Rashi on the first really wide line. Michtei Machshava the Pasuk Rachman the Mincha Kesheru. What is the makar of a psul Shaloi Lishma? The Iskish Rachmana Mincha L'Zvachim. The Torah made a hekesh between Mincha and Zvachim with the Chsiv, Kodesh Ami, Kachatas v'Ka'asham. That's the pasuk we just quoted. The Torah is comparing the Mincha to a Chatas and an Asham. Ma Zvachim, Pas Laba Machshova. Just like by Zvachim, Shaloi Lishma will be possible, Kedechsiv, Hamakri Boisai Lo Yechashev, Av Minchanami, will be possible, Mali Shinu Kodesh, Mali Shinu Bailam. It's a pasuk telling you that a wrong kavanah will pass. Zok Rab Shimon, no. Zok Rabbi Rab Shimon says Davka Minkara Machshava Deloy Minkara Imechazev Imlav. That's where pasuk Rachmana. The Chashav Lu Machshava, that's considered a legit Machshava that's derailing the carbon. Avo Machshava the Minkara Lekoil Shu Mechazev Lo have a Machshava. That's not even a real legitimate Machshava. That's not a joke. Hach Machshava the Kochim. So period. Now Rashi is telling us, I don't know why Rashi waits over here to tell us, but Rashi is telling us a major important yesod. When we say you had a machshava of Shaloi Lishma, it doesn't mean you just kept it in your mind. It had to have been articulated. Hak machshava the kochim hoitzas dibur bepehu. It's a very important Rashi to remember, because whenever there's a machshava related to kochim, whether it's machshava Shaloi Lishma, whether it's pigul, the machshava always has to be articulated. Otherwise, it does not have an impact. So hak machshava the kochim hoitzas dibur bepehu kedamin above Messiah al kol dvar pesha l'chayev al machshava k'maisa the lav moitzoi bepeh machshavasoi l'may nechayev. If you're not going to articulate it, we're not going to be mechayev for it. So that's a very important yesod all over kochim. I'm sorry? Correct. It has to be articulated. Simin oila malak umitza chatas oiv kochim kalam. We have a lot of Gemaras we're going to go through now, all represented by one of these words. Frek the Gemara, Elomayata. According to you, Rabbi, oila sa'oif shemolka lamaila mishum chatas sa'oif. Where are you supposed to do malika for the oila sa'oif? You're supposed to do it on top of the mizbeach. Where are you supposed to do the malika for the chatas oif? On the floor beside the mizbeach. So what if someone did an oila oif and he made the malika on top the way an oila is normally treated, but he said, I'm being moiled to oif l'shem chatas? Is that not also obviously a wrong kavanah? Because no one's doing the malika on the chatas oif on top. So according to you, Rab Shimon, how come you're only saying that the shaloi l'shma psul doesn't apply to mincha? It shouldn't apply to oila oif either. Tirtza Maseh. Because Tirtza should be good because Maseh Moichichan Aleh. The Oilas Oifi, it's clear that it's an Oilas Oif. The Ichatas Oifi, Lamata Avidla. Good kasha. Once Reb Shimon says, if it's obvious that your Machshova is a wrong Machshova, you would ignore the Machshova, so then why do we assume that Oilas Ha'oif, by an Oilah there's a psul of Shaloi Lishma, there shouldn't be a psul of Shaloi Lishma? So Reb Shimon at least should have spoken out this exception by the Oif as well. Zok Gemara, that's not a kasha. Otu Chatas Ha'oif, Lamai Lami Lesa. Yes, the ideal place for a Chatas Ha'oif is at the bottom. The ideal place is for Oilas Ha'oif is at the top. But that doesn't mean you could never be makriv, you can never shecht, or you can never do the malika of a Chatas Ha'oif on top. Ha'amar Mar, malika b'chol mokaim b'mizbech ksheira. So that's not a kasha, because yes, it's possible that you're making the malika on the Chatas Ha'oif l'mayla, and therefore it's not obvious that your machshava is wrong. Okay, but what about the next case? What about oilas ha'oif shemitza doma l'mayla l'shem chatas ha'oif? Now, where do you squeeze out the blood of the chatas ha'oif? On the bottom of the mizbeach, on the lower half of the wall of the mizbeach. If you did an oila and you properly spritzed or squeezed out the blood on the top half of the mizbeach, but you did it l'shem chatos, v'ayter tirtza, because my sayah mechichan aleh the oilas ha'oifi, the chatas ha'oifi, there would be two things he would have done differently. A is l'mayla, l'mata have ovidlei, and v'azah have ovidlei. By the oila, all you do is you squeeze the bird out against the mizbeach and you squeeze out its dam. By the chatos, and it was done at the bottom of the mizbeach, and he gave it a squeeze and a kvetch, and he shot dam out of the body of the bird out of the mizbeach. And after that zrika, then he made mitzvah. So he clearly did the avodah of dam of an oilos oif, and he clearly did it in the place, in the mokim, on top of the mizbeach, where the oilos oif is done. So if he did that zrika l'shem chatos, vayter should be kosher. So Reb Shimon should have said that in this case, with an oilos oif that you did l'shem chatos, it should be kosher because ma'asav mechichin aleh, that it's really an oila and not a chatos. Zok to Gemara on Daf Gimel Amar Aleph, Amri Dilma Mitzui de Basar Azahu. How do you know that the Mitzui that he's doing there is the only matnas dam that he did? Maybe it's possible that there was already hazah dam where it was supposed to be done, and now he's just doing the mitzvah in the wrong place, and he's doing the mitzvah of the oila l'shem chatos. So it's again not obvious that he's making a mistake. He might have been confused. Amri dilma mitzvah the basar zarahu. The Amar Mar mitzvah dama b'chamokim b'mizbeach kshera. Even a chatos, if the mitzvah was done on the top half of the mizbeach, it would be kosher. So it's legitimate to say that he mistakenly thought that it was a chatos or oif, and once again, it wouldn't be comparable to a mincha. Zok to Gemara, what about chatas ha'oif shehiza dama lemata l'shem oilas ha'oif? What if you made a zrikas dam on the chatas ha'oif lemata like you're supposed to do it, but he did that zrika l'shem oila? There should be tirtza. Why? The ma'aseh mechichin aleh the chatas ha'oifi, because it's surely a chatas ha'oif. The oilas ha'oifi, first of all, it has to be shechted l'may lahav avid law, and umitzi avid law, he would make a zrika. So clearly, it's exactly like a mincha. Shechting or making mitzi adam or zrikas adam lamata l'shem chatos with the kavana vayla, that shouldn't pass la shalei l'shma, because it's obvious he's doing the wrong thing. Zok to Gemara, you're right. Hachanami, you're right. In fact, according to Reb Shimon, this would also be a case where there wouldn't be a psul shalei l'shma, because it's obvious that this is a chatos and not an oila. Ela levi she'ena menachos doimis l'zvachim ka'amar l'zvachim. So Reb Shimon picked to say that it's not doim l'zvachim, but the vada hu adin oifis as well in certain cases. So Rashi v'loy live hakanami the vada moed Reb Shimon but the Of course, Reb Shimon would be moed in this case where you did the mitzvah of a chatas oif at the bottom half of the mizbeach, in fact, or you made the zrika the dam. So you made zrika the dam of the chatas oif and the bottom half of the mizbech l'shem oila. And Yechanami, there Reb Shimon would hold there's no psul shlo l'shma because it's obviously not what he's doing. The vade la'oifos doimen. In fact, there are doimen to oifos. The oifos olu l'shem chayva. In fact, there's an example where the oifos will be olu l'shem chayva. Goy chatas oif, she said dam l'mata l'shem oila soif. So in fact, that would be kosher, just like a mincha would be kosher. It's only this vachim that across the board you don't have ma'asav v'chichin because it's all the same shchita, it's all the same zrika, and only by a zvachim, by a carbon of a behema, would you be able to have a psul of shalei l'shma. Okay, gewaltig. But we're not out of the wood yet. We're not out of the wood yet. Kachim kachim sheshachton b'tzafain l'shem kachim kal. You're shechting an oila in the tzafin where it's supposed to be shechted, and you shechted it l'shem shlomim. According to your understanding of Reb Shimon, lirtzu, because my saying moichichin alayim the kachim kachim ninu. The fact that you're shechting b'tzafain is a kloraraya that it's kachim kachim and not kachim kalim. The kachim kalim b'dorim hava avad lahu. If it was a shlomim, he would have shechted it on the dorim side of the azara, not on the tzafin side. So once again, you have an example even by zvachim where there wouldn't be a psul of shaloi lishma. Zok to Gemara, Eimer d'Omer Achmana af b'darim. When the Torah said that you shecht kachim kalim b'darim, it doesn't mean bedafke b'darim. It means af b'darim. You could even shecht it b'darim, but you could shecht it b'tzafan too. So yes, shechting something with darim would indicate that it's kachim kalim, but shechting something b'tzafan doesn't necessarily prove that it's kachim, because af b'darim, b'darim v'loy b'tzafan mi omar. No one ever said that kachim kalim may only be shechted b'darim and not b'tzafin. The Tanan shchitasan b'chol makim bazar. Right in the Zer Mekayman, we say that shalomim and other kadishim kalim shchitasan b'chol makim bazar. But what about kadishim kalim sheshachtam b'darim l'shem kachim? What if I'm shechting a shlomim on the darim side of the azar and the kohen shechts it l'shem anoila? So that should be obviously a wrong kavanah. So weiter we should say lirtzu, because my saying moichichin aleim the kachim kalim ninu the kachim b'tzafin hava avadlu. He would have done it on the tzafin side. Amri zok to Gemara, and this is where it gets a little sticky. Amri, no, maybe it's still kachim, and it's not obvious that just because they're shechting it b'darim that it's kachim from kalim. You're shechting it b'darim. How could you say it's kachim kalim? How could you say that it's kachim? Umi aver hu the aver v'shachet lehu b'darim. Yeah, maybe we'll say that he's mistaken. He's shechting it in the wrong place. For the Gemara, once you're opening us up to such a svara that it could be an honest mistake, well then the yachi machlas l'shem marcheshes nami. Haidika comments law l'marcheshes. Maybe the reason why he's koimitz the machmas l'shem marcheshes is Omar hai b'marcheshes nadar. Really, it's a marcheshes. V'had the ma'isila b'machvas. The reason why, even though it's brought in the machvas, it's really marcheshesi uma'aver hu da'aver v'asi b'machvas. Once you're going to say that if you're doing something obviously wrong, you could say it's not really obviously wrong. Maybe he made a mistake. So when you're shechting l'shem oila on the darim side, we're not going to say it's a ridiculous kavanah that has to be totally abandoned. Rather, it's a legitimate kavanah, and by mistake, he's shechting the kachim b'darim. If you're going to make such a taina, so then Reb Shimon's whole taina is diffused, because every single type of obviously wrong kavanah, you can fetch it and massage it to make it that it shouldn't be obviously wrong. So Zokt Gemara Ihachi, with your svara now, that you can assume that he's making a little bit of a mistake, and it's still considered a legitimate kavanah of shaloi lishma, machmas l'shem marcheshes nami, haidik comments little marcheshes, Amar hai b'marcheshes nodar. You know why he'll say the Bailim said I'm bringing a michas marcheshes, but he brought it in a machvas. V'hadamaisila b'machvas, he brought it in a machvas, but it's still a michas marcheshes. The marcheshesu, he really is bringing a michas marcheshes. I put it into a machvas, he's being over. Uma'aver hu the over. but it's really a Minchas Macheshes. Hasam Kinami b'Macheshes Nadar. Zogt Gemara, that wouldn't make sense. Because by the Mincha, Kinami b'Macheshes Nadar, if the Bailim said, I'm bringing a Minchas Macheshes, Kimai Sele b'Machvas, Machvas Havna. The keli that it's brought in determines what it is. You can't say this is really a Macheshes brought in the keli of a Machvas. If you brought it in the keli of a Machvas, it is a Minchas Machvas. How do I know that? If someone says, I'm going to bring a Minchas Machvas, the heavy b'Macheshes, and instead he brought the wrong Mincha. He didn't bring the Mincha that he said he was going to bring. Or vice versa. B'Macheshes, heavy b'Machvas, the loch is heavy. The Mincha that he brought wrong is a Mincha, it's a kosher Mincha. But v'dei nidra layotza. But he was never yotz his nether, because it's not what he didn't fulfill his nether. If he did Machvas and he brought Macheshes, we don't say it's really the Macheshes. We don't. If he said Machvas and he brought Macheshes, we don't say it's a Machvas disguised as a Macheshes. We say it's a Macheshes. And if he said Machvas and he brought a Macheshes, it's very nice that he brought a Macheshes, but it's not as Machvas. So therefore, you can't have this whole taina where the kohen making the kmitza had a legitimate kavanah, but he thought it was a Macheshes disguised as a Machvas. There is no such thing. But there is such a thing as saying that maybe there was a mistake done here, and this oilo is being shechted b'dar. Okay, we'll stop here, and we'll be bamshich bez Hashem tomorrow. Tomorrow we get a little bit into the twilight zone. The svaras start to get a little bit more kachim.
We got to put some nice rest of these in.